Hello readers by eyes and by ears, this is Mari Chan and welcome back to my channel. Today we are continuing with another reading of Ballad of Sword and Wine, also known as Tang Jiu Qing. We are on volume 6 and we are reading today chapters 193 through 194. So I hope you all enjoy. Don't forget to leave your thoughts and reactions in the comment section, and I would love to just see where you guys' thoughts are pertaining to the series. So let's go ahead and get started. Chapter 193, Wary. Yan Hezhu corrected course at the last minute. Pretty little baubles. How good of you to have prepared a gift. Only then did Shan Zichuan set his brush down. Show young Master Yan to a seat. Qiao Tianya removed his hand, and Fei Sheng ushered Yan Hezhu in, saying, "Quickly now, some tea for young Master Yan." Yan Hezhu had suffered an enormous financial loss this time. He had carefully selected a number of exceedingly good-looking boys and girls from Cui Qing. He'd originally intended to get on Yao Wenyu's good side by letting him have first pick and thus pave the way for his dealings with Shan Zichuan. But he'd been denied so much as a glimpse of Yao Wenyu's face. On entering this courtyard, he then thought to give them to Shan Zichuan instead. After all, what kind of man didn't love a pretty little thing? It wasn't as if Xiaowar was some otherworldly beauty that put flowers to shame. Sir, I'm gonna need you to stop. Rubbing the back of his head, Yan Hezhu marked Qiao Tianya down in his book of grudges, then lifted the hem of his robes to take his seat. He still wore an amiable expression, but his smile was more restrained now. The Prince of Libei was really a legend of our age. Who doesn't know of his amazing feats on the battlefield, no? I was simply worried the prefectural governor and the marquis would be overcome with grief. If you got sick from it, you would be staining the memory of the late prince, who cared so much for his children. See, that's why I rushed over here playing the boor, to coax a smile out of the governor. My deepest condolences, your lordship. Yan Hezhu spoke the official dialect with a hint of Hezhou accent. He couldn't seem to shed his habit of adding "si," "yes," "no," and other little interjections, which made his speech sweet and childlike. When he spoke those words of comfort in his lilting tone, he sounded almost genuine. Shan Zichuan accepted his kindness. After all, he had accrued massive expenses all over the territory this past year and was depending on Yan Hezhu for all of them. Shan Zichuan let Yan Hezhu speak while he took the medicine from Fei Sheng and drank a few sips. "Expression gentle," he said. "When I was in Libei, I heard you aided border camp with tens of thousands of silver taels to build their roads." That was chump change," Yan Hezhu said. "Nothing for the governor to worry about. Besides, we're all on the same side now, yes? Everything Libei and Qidong do is for the sake of fighting those Biansha Baldis. I'm just a little merchant who can't help any other way. Consider it a small gesture of my goodwill." Fei Sheng scoffed to himself. This lad was as good as Fei Sheng himself at pretending to be a decent human being. Here he was going on and on about being on the same side, yet he hadn't shown the slightest twinge of guilt back in Duanzhou when he and his merchants were discovered trading with Biansha. Shan Zichuan finished his medicine and said after a moment's pause, "Was there a particular reason for your visit today?" "I just wanted to see for myself that your lordship is well, that's all." Once again, Yan Hezhu flashed a smile. "Your lordship is like my own brother. If I go a day without clapping eyes on you, I miss you like crazy." Even as the words rolled off his tongue, he impulsively straightened in his seat and said, Maybe your lordship would take me as your younger brother. I can get down and kowtow to you now." Shameless creature that he was, Yan Hezhu had addressed Cai Yu as Pa and Lei Chongming as Da Ge, and he even called Lei Jingzhe nephew whenever he saw him. Now that the game had changed and Shan Zichuan was in control of the board, he hoped to slide into position as Shan Zichuan's little brother. So what if it meant being his subservient hanger-on, his lowly minion? All of that was insignificant compared to money. Yan Hezhu saw that more clearly than anyone. "Sure." Noting Yan Hezhu's good mood, Shan Zichuan humored him. "Kowtow twice to Shen Wei, and we'll be part of the same clan." Okay. Yan Hezhu almost spat on the ground. He was no fool. Any association with Shun Wei would be an instant blow to his reputation. He would be cursed in both the East and West. He beat a hasty retreat. Oh, never mind. My family's got rules. Kowtowing to Shun Wei is out of the question. After a beat, he turned to Shun Sichuan again, dragging out his words. Your lordship. Hey, your lordship. Yan Hezhu perked up. Well, since I'm here, I have something else to discuss with you. Qidong has come to an agreement with our Suzhou, right? There'll be no problem with the marshal's military provisions this year. I'll take care of it. All of it. Shun Sichuan took a sip of tea to rinse his mouth, in no hurry to respond. Sure enough, Yan Hezhu prattled on. Chudu fears you now. You're surrounded by powerful military forces. If you really came to blows with the capital, how would the 8th Grade Battalion stand a chance? But it's unlikely they'll just take it lying down. I'm thinking Chudu will cut off our trade with Jueshi this year. At the very least, they'll try to take the Shi clan's copper mines and fleet of merchant ships off your hands. The Shi clan ships in the port of Yongyi were essential to Cizhou's business with the Huiyan tribe at Li Bei's trade market. The coarse tea Shun Sichuan's people bought there was worth nothing in Jueshi. A profit could only be made by shipping it overseas. Yan Hezhu cared not a bit about the seizure of the Shi clan's properties. Those weren't his shops or his ships. What concerned him was the loss of the Yan clan's grain business in Zhongbo. He had to find something to fill this void, and he had his eye on the port. What did you have in mind? Shun Sichuan set down the lid of his teacup. Out with it. Yan Hezhu plopped his elbows down on the table. I think we should let them have the port of Yongyi. Fingers resting on the teacup lid, Shun Sichuan glanced up. Yan Hezhu's eyes gleamed with ambition. Shun Sichuan didn't reply immediately. He sat patiently, and within a few moments, he had figured out Yan Hezhu's plan. Yan Hezhu blinked coyly. We can always build a new one, no? The Yan clan of Hezhou occupied the inland waterways throughout the south of the Zhou Empire, which allowed them to do business all over the land. But once their goods arrived in Jueshi, they had to hand them over to the Shi clan's fleet at the port of Yongyi for trading overseas. The lion's share of the profits from this trade route went not into Yan Hezhu's pockets, but Shi Hongxuan's, or rather now, Shun Sichuan's. Yan Hezhu had been attempting to cozy up to Shun Sichuan all this while, making all kinds of brazen offers to collaborate, because he saw the consolidation of trade routes all over the country. Shun Sichuan moved quickly. If Yan Hezhu wished to compete, he had to keep up. For Yan Hezhu, the threat of Jueshi seizing the copper mines and shutting down the port of Yongyi was a golden opportunity to gain some ground. When Yan Hezhu had first ventured up north a few years ago, he'd faced a number of setbacks. Li Bei refused to do business with him, so he'd established a smaller trade market in Dunzhou and made use of the brokerage to launder money for officials from all over the land. It was the same now. He was just as gutsy as he'd been then. Giving up the port of Yongyi meant the Shi clan would no longer obstruct the Yan clan in the west. Yan Hezhu wanted firm control over both inland and overseas water routes so he could stand on equal footing with Shun Sichuan in these turbulent times. Shun Sichuan brushed the edge of the lid with his fingertips as he contemplated. How are you going to get around Jiang Qingshan? Why would I need to when your lordship has so much leverage against Jueshi's officials in your hands? Yan Hezhu grinned boyishly, revealing his sharp little canines. Remember all those merchants who traveled to Dunzhou to launder money on behalf of one official or another? Well, there are plenty of officials from Jueshi among the names recorded. If the brokerage's account books fall into Jiang Qingshan's hands, there will be hell to pay. That's if the officials make it out alive. I shoveled unbelievable amounts of bribe money into Jueshi just to gain access to the market there. Now it's time for me to collect on that debt. There were hundreds of officials and lesser functionaries in any given region. Even if the prefectural governor himself was upright and fair, he couldn't guarantee all the subordinates under him were clean. The administration of cities and prefectures was complex and tedious work, and there were only so many men working the investigating censor circuit. There were blind spots from top to bottom. all of them openings for Yan Hezhu to exploit. He could do business on such a large scale in Jueshi, right next to the Xi clan, because the men on the local government's payroll were his own personal subjects who had successfully protected him. Now those same men would become the stepping stones that paved his way forward. Shen Zichuan found himself reevaluating Yan Hezhu yet again. The young man had been shameless from the moment they'd met in Duanzhou. Even when Shen Zichuan had continued to give him the cold shoulder, he'd persisted with a broad smile. It was easy to forget he was the helmsman of the Yan clan of Hezhou, the same family that had profited tremendously from the Zhongbo tragedy just a few years ago. He'd been quick to cast Lei Jingzhe aside and had even been willing to trap and kill him in Duanzhou just to win Shen Zichuan over. No matter how sweetly Yan Hezhu addressed someone, he wouldn't waver for a moment when it came to taking their life. He was truly a money grubber, famous for his refusal to go out without a golden carriage. He wouldn't even show his face at the bargaining table if the party sitting across from him didn't have enough to offer. Liuzhou, out along the coast, is the perfect place. It's pretty remote, and it lies quite a ways from the port of Yongyi. What's more, it has a crescent-shaped bay, so the ships won't be exposed to the open sea. As long as we can keep Yo Tan, Liuzhou's prefect, quiet, we're in business. Yan Hezhu rapped his golden abacus. Make good use of the records from the brokerage, and the merchants we send through Jueshi won't need to pay taxes to Jiang Qingshan. When that happens, your lordship can have final say over the tariffs and inland commercial tax. Once you reign supreme and take all 13 cities of Jueshi, those corrupt officials can be my little housewarming present. Wash the land in their blood, and then we'll see who still dares take bribes on your watch. He wanted to drain every last drop from this resource and dispense it the second it was no longer useful. Yan Hezhu hadn't even come of age, yet he was already well acquainted with the words ruthless and merciless. Sporting that innocent face, he clacked away on his little abacus. What he calculated out was not just money, but lives. Shen Zichuan had no reason to reject Yan Hezhu's proposal. Indeed, he needed a new port if he hoped to go around Jiang Qingshan. He wasn't willing to concede the copper mines either. All his expenses were increasing this year due to the war. By the time he recovered the remaining 3 prefectures of Zhongbo, the bill would no doubt have multiplied again. How far-sighted of you, Shen Zichuan said, affecting wonder. It seems I still can't compare to you in these matters of business. After Yan Hezhu took his leave, Qiao Tianya leaned a hand on the chair's armrest and watched the door's hanging screen fall. Some people need killing. He's resourceful, and he knows how to get on someone's good side. Shen Zichuan also watched the screen sway gently. In time, he'll be more trouble than he's worth. Yan Hezhu strode out of the residence and stepped onto his steward's bent back to board his carriage. As the carriage lurched forward, he removed the golden abacus and tossed it onto a stained cushion. Rubbing the back of his neck, he asked, "Have you found Heirigu?" A man lifted the curtain and slipped inside. He knelt and said, "Everyone in the Shun Manor keeps their mouth shut tight, and the place is filled with the embroidered uniform guard. I couldn't find any trace of him." Yan Hezhu rattled the beads on his abacus, vexed. "What embroidered uniform guard? A bunch of beggars from Chudu who hung up their hats to become lapdogs in Suzhou. Shen Zichuan is wary of me after I mentioned the port in Liuzhou today. Who knows? He's probably plotting my death right this second." This man, Yan Miao, had come from the brokerage in Duanzhou. He was the son of a servant whose whole family served the Yan clan and acted as the broker who handled all incoming and outgoing accounts. Yan Hezhu had stationed him in Duanzhou a few years ago and trusted him immensely. In the dim light, Yan Miao raised his head slightly. "From what I can see of Shen Zichuan's activities in Suzhou, he's not as vindictive as the rumors say. The war is urgent now, and both the northern and southern battlefronts are reliant on him for resources. We mustn't act rashly and ruin our relationship with him. He's having me cover 2 prefectures' granaries at the start of spring." Yan Hezhu flicked the abacus beads back and forth. "Is that not a warning? You think he isn't someone who'll seek revenge over small details? Think again." Kong Chengfeng rejected him thrice, Yet he never flew into a rage. He's continued to treat him with respect. Yan Miao said. We're supplying grain for 2 prefectures, along with Qidong's military provisions this year. We'll also front the funds and labor for the construction of a new port in the west. He ought to recognize Xiao Gong's sincerity. Yan Hezhu suddenly swept the abacus off his lap. He sat in frustrated silence for a moment before bursting out. Miao, you don't get it. Shen Zichuan treats Kong Ling well because Kong Ling is willing to work for the good of Zizhou despite not wanting to answer to Shen Zichuan as a subordinate. It was Kong Ling who negotiated with Huaizhou at the beginning of autumn, and it was also Kong Ling who played peacemaker when Shen Zichuan and Zhou Gui's advisors nearly fell out at the end of the year. How else do you think a blockhead like Zhou Gui can remain the prefect of Zizhou? Shen Zichuan is making the most of his resources. He knows that little 2-man team won't turn against him. They'll build an unassailable fortress around Zizhou on his behalf. As for me, if he genuinely wanted to keep me as a partner for the long haul, why would he tolerate his lapdogs barking at me time and time again? He would have said more, but Yan Miao straightened and warned in a low voice. Xiao Gongzi. Yan Hezhu paused. Straining to listen, he caught the clatter of hooves outside the carriage. He retrieved his abacus, then crawled over to the curtain and dropped his voice to a whisper. Who's that? The Libe armored cavalry, Yan Miao answered. A pang of fear shot through Yan Hezhu. He clutched his abacus to his chest in the swaying carriage. He was just screwing up his courage to take a peek when the carriage came to an abrupt stop. Snowcrest, dark against the blanket of billowing snow, had slowed to a halt alongside the carriage. Xiao Chuye cracked his whip, and Chun Yang and the Libe armored cavalry behind him followed suit and halted too. Yan Hezhu patted his cheeks with both hands, then pulled the carriage curtains open. I thought it might be the second young master. I was just thinking of you, he said warmly. Xiao Chuye swept a glance over Yan Miao kneeling inside before fixing his gaze on Yan Hezhu. You've been to see the governor? Yan Hezhu gulped. He'd heard Xiao Chuye had run in the snow for half the night in order to retrieve the Prince of Libe, and that not only did he not freeze to death, he broke the necks of a dozen men when he got there. Yan Hezhu didn't know if it was because of these rumors, but he felt Xiao Chuye's presence suddenly had a new weight to it. The imposing aura that assailed him was so overwhelming, he broke into a light sweat. I did, yes. Yan Hezhu looked as though he was overheating as he dabbed at his forehead. I left some gems in jade for the second master. If you like the look of them, let me know. There are plenty more in Hezhou. Xiao Chuye had just come from border camp and had no desire to engage in idle chatter with Yan Hezhu, so he merely nodded and left with his men. The Libe armored cavalry swept past like the wind. Only when they were gone did Yan Hezhu dare to rub his arms and shudder. Recalling something, Yan Miao commented, The second master has been looking for the venerable master Yideng for a while now. Is that so? Yan Hezhu tilted his head to watch the fine spray of snow kicked up by the cavalry. His gaze sharpened, and he said with a smile, But to me, keeping Shen Zichuan sick is a lot better than letting him recover. Chapter 194. Sound Sleep. Qiao Tianya remained in the room, waiting for the rest of Shen Zichuan's instructions. Tell Yuan Zhuo about the new port in Liuzhou when you go back, Shen Zichuan said. We'll discuss it in detail later. The weather's been cold lately. Keep the underfloor furnaces running. Don't let him fall ill again. So you can care for someone else's health, just not your own. More at ease with Shen Zichuan than Fei Sheng was, Qiao Tianya answered simply, I've been keeping an eye on it. Shen Zichuan thought for a moment. Quite a lot of people have come calling this year seeking a career and future from our court. Ward them off for a few more days until Yuan Zhuo recovers from his illness. You did well today. Yan Hezhu has ulterior motives. Don't let him in next time either. Qiao Tianya fished out a folded-up booklet from his sleeve and pushed it before Shen Zichuan. That's why I'm here, actually. There are a good number of reputable scholars among those who've come calling. Yuan Zhuo has already gone through them and prepared 2 lists of names. 2. With warm fingertips, Shan Zichuan opened the booklet for a look. This is a list of those you can retain but cannot use. Qiao Tianya gestured at the right side, then the left, while this is a list of those you can retain and use. Shan Zichuan looked over the right-hand list. They were all scholars with good reputations. What Zhongbo most needed at present were practical doers who could see things through. In that regard, few of these were useful to him. Yet these people had come from afar to throw in their lot with Shan Zichuan. For the sake of his own reputation, Shan Zichuan couldn't afford to slight them either. He would have to house them in his manor and keep them on as literary retainers. In contrast, those of use in the left-hand list were nearly all unknowns. "We'll need a new cohort this spring," Shan Zichuan said. "When the time comes, include the talents Zhou Gui picked out and draw up a list for each prefecture." Shan Zichuan intended to reclaim Zhongbo's remaining 3 prefectures by spring. If they missed the spring plowing, he would have to worry over provisions again at the end of the year. Qiao Tianya acknowledged the order. Upon hearing the tread of footsteps on the walkway outside, he rose and announced with a smile, "Arye is back." After Xiao Fengshu's demise, Xiao Jiming had become the Prince of Libei. Calling Xiao Chiye Argongzi, second young master, was no longer appropriate. Everyone now addressed him as Arye, the second master after Xiao Jiming, who was now the head of the clan. Xiao Chiye paused under the eaves while Chun Yang and Gu Jin relieved him of his cloak. A maidservant presented a hot handkerchief for him to wipe his hands, and Ding Tao quickly lifted the hanging screen for Xiao Chiye to enter. Qiao Tianya and Fei Sheng tactfully made to retreat, but Xiao Chiye stopped them. "Where's Heirigu?" Fei Sheng cast a sidelong glance at Shan Zichuan, answering only when he saw Shan Zichuan's subtle nod. "Arye, he's at our Beiyuan training grounds." He bent to take the handkerchief from Xiao Chiye as he continued. "Master made arrangements for the embroidered uniform guard to do a daily head count to prevent his scorpions from rolling all over the place." "Gu Jin," Xiao Chiye said over his shoulder, "make a trip to the Beiyuan training grounds later to see Heirigu." Since Shan Zichuan was listening, Fei Sheng didn't question this. He bowed again to Xiao Chiye and withdrew with Xiao Tianya. As guards, they couldn't very well stand under the eaves and chatter where their masters could hear. By silent agreement, everyone moved to the veranda at the other side of the courtyard to talk. The interior of the room was warm. Xiao Chiye removed his blade and undressed, and Shan Zichuan gazed up at him from his chair. Xiao Chiye had ridden non-stop from the front lines to border camp, then from border camp to Zhongbo, yet he found it all worth it upon seeing the expression in Shan Zichuan's eyes. He leaned over, his body blocking the chair from the view of anyone in the doorway. "You've gotten thinner." Shan Zichuan, still holding the brush, caressed its smooth shaft and whispered back, feigning ignorance, "Thinner where?" Xiao Chiye cupped Shan Zichuan's chin to keep him from shying away, then pressed him into the chair for a kiss. Shan Zichuan tilted his head back, exposing his elegant throat as he faced all of Xiao Chiye's iciness and melted it with his gaze. Abandoning the brush, he slid his hand up Xiao Chiye's arms and wound them around his neck as Xiao Chiye scooped him up. The kiss contained no consolation, a sentiment that could be bestowed on them by others. The insatiable desire laid bare as they reached for each other was who they really were, the taste of their tongues unique to this pair of lovers. Xiao Chiye craved such interdependence, both secretive and extreme. This was where he belonged. His territory. Shan Zichuan was burning up from the kiss. Xiao Chiye set him on the table. Bracing a hand on either side of his hips, Xiao Chiye gazed at him with all the seriousness he could muster. It didn't take long for the flush to spread from Shan Zichuan's earlobes to the corner of his eyes. He seemed as if he couldn't bear Xiao Chiye any longer, couldn't endure such an invasive gaze. This seduction was a different kind of devastation. Despite being intimately familiar with one another, even with their eyes closed, they could find each other's most sensitive spots. In this moment, Shen Zichuan could feel his heartstrings stirring just from the tantalizing promise in Xiao Chuye's eyes. His breathing quickened, and tiny beads of sweat glided along the satiny skin of his back. Xiao Chuye looked so very dangerous, as if he would ravage Shen Zichuan like a tempest the moment he was freed of whatever shackles held him back. He needed Shen Zichuan far too much, yet he was unusually restrained. His desire surged like magma beneath a thin layer of ice. In Xiao Chuye's regard, Shen Zichuan sensed a love so intense, so ardent, that it could crush him in its grip. This was the look of desire suppressed. Slowly, Xiao Chuye kissed Shen Zichuan. He took off his outer robe and flung it over a chair. "I'm going to the bath." Shen Zichuan brushed fine sweat off Xiao Chuye's jaw with one fingertip, then pulled away and blinked, motioning for him to go ahead. When Xiao Chuye reappeared, he had changed into fresh clothes. He was drying his hair in the inner chamber when he spotted a small box on the table. Inside were the gems and jades Yan Hezhu had sent. In the exterior chamber, Chun Yang was talking to Shen Zichuan. "I have to return to border camp in 3 days, but Master will stay." Shen Zichuan seemed to be looking over the documents on the table and was slow to answer. "The 2nd month is approaching. Has the location for the new stables on Mount Luo been decided?" Xiao Chuye plucked up a piece of red jade and caressed it. "Yes," Chun Yang answered. "Once we reclaim Duanzhou, we can begin construction." "The new spears General Lu wants should be ready by the end of the 2nd month," Shen Zichuan said. "When the time comes, we'll send them directly via the new road." The rest of their talk all revolved around tedious duties. As Xiao Chuye listened, he recalled the defensive battle he'd fought a few days back. The Imperial Army had been stationed at 2nd Sand Camp, where Xiao Chuye had taken command in Jiang Sheng's place. Guo Weili and Zhao Hui had both been transferred back to their original camps, while Zuo Qianqiu and Lu Guangbai were jointly overseeing 1st Sand Camp. Xiao Jiming's intent with this arrangement was obvious. The Libe armored cavalry had given up advancing and was now relying on the 2 men most skilled at defense to hold the front line against Hassan's attacks. Libe had gone completely on the defensive. Not only that, Xiao Jiming had made changes to troop organization. In the past, a change of general meant the entire command moved with them. All the soldiers had to be transferred between camps. It was different now. Other than Zuo Qianqiu, who remained in place at 1st Sand Camp, the other 3 commanding generals rotated at irregular intervals. This gave Guo Weili a splitting headache. The men he was used to leading would no longer be under his command, and Zuo Qianqiu was there looking over his shoulder during defensive battles. The chain around his neck had shortened so much it was strangling him, chafing him terribly. Meanwhile, Xiao Chuye had to break away from the Imperial Army and adapt to the armored cavalry of the remaining 2 camps. It posed an even bigger challenge for Lu Guangbai, who had to familiarize himself with leading a cavalry after years of being an infantryman stuck to the ground. Everyone was crashing into one another as if they were bound hand and foot, unaccustomed to this new way of fighting. But the benefits were immediately apparent. Since the commanders rotated in random order, Hassan could never be sure whom his opponent would be when he launched an attack. The morale of the Libe armored cavalry was low after the loss of Xiao Fengshu, but they did not collapse as the Biansha horsemen had hoped. Hassan not only faced Zuo Qianqiu, who'd famously stood guard at Tianfei Watchtower, but also had to watch out for the infantry from Bianjun Commandery, who could conceal themselves in the snow. Hassan had no idea what had happened within Libe behind that iron wall, except that the swift victory he'd expected never came. Both parties instead fell into a stalemate, even more tense than before. It was only now that Hassan finally got a taste of how formidable Xiao Jiming truly was. The new prince of Libe was entirely unlike Xiao Fengshu. He seemed to have cowered away and holed himself up in Libe's homeland, but in reality, he had drawn a hard line on the eastern front, making it impossible for Hassan to gain even an inch. Xiao Chuye shook off his distraction and closed the box. Chen Yang had taken his leave, and Shen Sichuan was still writing at the table. The rustle of ink and brush blended into the whisper of falling snow. Xiao Chiye didn't go out and disturb him. He knew Shen Sichuan was in a rush to take down King Yi before the second month, and that the advisors were waiting for him in Zhou Gui's study to discuss the deployment of troops. Xiao Chiye set his towel aside and fell back onto the rumpled bedding. Shen Sichuan hadn't let the maidservants make the bed when he was woken the night before. Xiao Chiye wondered if it was intentional. He could still imagine a whiff of Shen Sichuan's scent as he nestled under the covers. It left him instantly relaxed, dispelling the heavy mood that had shadowed him since leaving the battlefield. Xiao Chiye closed his eyes and fell asleep before his hair had even dried. When Fei Shang came to call Shen Sichuan in the late afternoon, he at last extracted himself from his work. "Open the windows. It's rather stuffy," he instructed Fei Shang. As he rose, he remembered something and added, "Never mind. Wait for me at the door." Fei Shang bowed and retreated. The back of Shen Sichuan's neck was aching from bending over the desk too long. He lifted the hanging screen to the inner chamber and heard Xiao Chiye's steady breathing. Xiao Chiye lay on his side, face half buried in the bedding. He had fallen into a deep sleep of the truly exhausted. The injury on his shoulder had yet to fully heal, but he seemed to feel nothing, though he had his full weight on it. Afraid he would aggravate it lying on it like this, Shen Sichuan gently tugged at the back of Xiao Chiye's collar for a look, but even that slight force tipped him over onto his stomach. Smothered in the blankets, Xiao Chiye surfaced groggily from sleep, sprawled on the bed. He murmured without opening his eyes, "Military report." Shen Sichuan leaned close to Xiao Chiye's ear. "No reports. Go back to sleep." Xiao Chiye turned his face to the side to breathe. Shen Sichuan wiped his sweat for him, his fingers exceedingly gentle as they moved over his brow. Xiao Chiye grabbed his hand and held tight, refusing to let it go. "I won't be long," Shen Sichuan murmured. When he used to speak in this tone back in Chengdu, chances were he was trying to get under Xiao Chiye's skin, but now, the way he said it was so light and gentle, like the downy caress of a feather. Not even 100 Yan Hezhus with their lilting accents could hold a candle to him. But Xiao Chiye didn't let go. Fei Shang waited quite a while at the door. It was growing dark, and he feared if they delayed any further, the snowstorm would get heavier, and Shen Sichuan would catch a cold. He ducked back in and called softly from the other side of the hanging screen, "Master, it's time to go." After a moment's pause, Shen Sichuan replied, "Go stop Yuan Zhuo from heading over to the Zhou Manor. Tell him to come straight here instead. Then send someone to invite Zhou Gui and Cheng Feng over." Fei Shang understood that he meant to hold the discussion at home tonight. "Then, shall I guide the gentleman to the side hall?" Shen Sichuan sat at the edge of the bed in the dimness. The lamps were still unlit. "Let's just talk in the outside chambers here. We'll keep our voices down." Fei Shang nodded and took his leave, aware that the operative phrase was, "keep our voices down." Hence, before the gentleman arrived, he called for his subordinates to quietly set up a screen in the outer chamber, partitioning off a corner of the room for their conversation. Finding the room empty upon entering, Zhou Gui and Kong Ling looked at each other in puzzlement. Fei Shang hurriedly led them behind the screen. Voice low, he said, "My master's in the inner chamber." "Are ye too?" Kong Ling asked, lowering his voice to match. Fei Shang nodded slightly. Just to be safe, he added, "He's sleeping." They were brewing the tea when Qiao Tianya wheeled Yao Wenyu in. Fei Shang had laid out a rug to keep the wheelchair from making noise when it entered. Watching, Kong Ling couldn't help chuckling at Fei Shang's enterprising talent of ingratiating himself. Yao Wenyu didn't inquire about Shen Sichuan's whereabouts. Handling the teacup with care so as not to make any noise, he said, "Shen Wei's declaration of war against King Yi was published today. We can expect activity from Fanzhou soon. I'll have to trouble your excellency to keep a close eye on the matter." None of the three had naturally loud voices, so they were all at ease murmuring behind the screen. Zhou Gui added, "Fanzhou is surrounded. King Yi and Mount Luo have reached no agreement, and his troops are too weak to mount any true resistance. I don't imagine he's one to fight to the death. He'll definitely attempt to bargain with us. It would be best if we didn't have to fight. As someone who had suffered the ravages of war, Kong Ling would rather exhaust every diplomatic word before drawing any blade. King Yi made lofty promises to the citizens of Fanzhou during his rise, yet to this day he has not delivered on a single one. If he has any self-awareness, he should realize how powerless he is to resist. Even if King Yi himself is willing, the men under him might not be. Yao Wenyu thought for a moment longer. Fanzhou and Dengzhou, which King Yi has claimed, both have a major bandit problem, even worse than it was in Chazhou. There's also bound to be interference from the brothels, where Cui Qing and her ilk have been trafficking children from decent families. Again, to the well. These people know surrendering is as good as a death sentence. Shen Zichuan raised his hands to cover Xiao Trie's ears as he listened to their conversation in the darkness. Yao Wenyu was right. For both official and personal reasons, Shen Zichuan would never go easy on the bandits or the brothels. These people were the root of the corruption in Zhongbo's 2 southern prefectures. Allowing a scourge like this to survive would merely hinder the prefecture's progress. Shen Zichuan would exterminate them without hesitation, and they knew it. What if we offer them a pardon when our troops are at their gates? Zhou Gui put in. Then make the arrests once the gates are open. Kong Ling shook his head, passing Zhou Gui a teacup as he did. Have you considered that if someone accuses us of going easy on the bandits and incites the common folk of both prefectures, it will tarnish the governor's reputation? In every step he took, Shen Zichuan was treading with caution. Even while scheming to conquer the 4 corners of the land, it was imperative they took Shen Zichuan's reputation into consideration. In an attempt to override Shen Wei's infamy, every move they had made from Chazhou onward conspicuously proclaimed their benevolence and magnanimity. This was also why they required justification before waging any war, and why they could have no truck with bandits. Otherwise, even if they controlled all of Zhongbo in the future, Shen Zichuan would never establish himself as a virtuous ruler. Shen Zichuan was still considering their conversation when the crunch of footsteps sounded beneath the eaves. With Fei Shang gone to the kitchen to call for Shen Zichuan's medicine, there was no one outside to welcome the newcomer. Gao Zhongxiong, oblivious to the low-voiced discussion taking place inside, patted snow off his shoulders and called out as he entered, "My greetings to your lordship. That declaration—" The 3 men sitting in the outer chamber turned in unison and shushed him. Gao Zhongxiong's cheeks were red from the cold. He went silent at once and shrank his neck back. He was still feeling trepidatious when Zhou Gui beckoned him, but seeing as none of the gentlemen rebuked him, he gingerly tiptoed over and bent down to whisper, "I came to submit my report to his lordship." Unsure how to explain, Kong Ling merely said, "Later. Why don't you take a seat and have some tea?" I feel like I should read another chapter. Let's go ahead. Chapter 195. Mastiffs. Gao Zhongxiong didn't dare ask any more questions. He primly took a seat off to the side. The cold had nipped him badly on his way here. As he sat in the warmth, sensation returned to his ears that had been frozen numb. Noting that Gao Zhongxiong wore an old robe, Zhou Gui said, "It's bitterly cold in Zizhou. You're underdressed for this weather." Gao Zhongxiong looked a little embarrassed. He clutched the hem of his robe and answered in a minuscule voice, "Of course, you're right." Observant as always, Kong Ling stepped in. "The yamen you work in is a poor one. You're in a far worse position than those in lucrative posts. Any money that passes through your hands is small change. What's more, you've only just arrived in Suzhou. It can't be easy to get settled in a whole new place. If there's anything you need, don't hesitate to ask." His show of concern put Gao Zhongxiong instantly at ease. His eyes misted over, and he hurriedly stood to bow. "You have all showed me utmost solicitude. The governor, especially, has treated me with such tremendous kindness—" Zhou Gui waved a hand. "Take a seat. There's no one else here tonight. No need to stand on ceremony." Gao Zhongxiong had no wife, children, or relatives in Suzhou. Given his associations, no one at the yamen dared to let him pick up the tab during their usual social functions. His monthly salary should have been more than sufficient. What he didn't dare tell anyone was that all his money had gone to support Han Jin. Shen Zichuan had released Han Jin from prison the previous autumn and settled him in a side courtyard. The former commissioner of the 8th Grade Battalions had suffered greatly in prison. Supplied with adequate meat and wine upon his release, he did nothing but eat and drink to his heart's content for weeks after gaining his freedom. Shen Zichuan had sent several attendants to the courtyard to take care of his needs, and once he was back in the pink of health, a young servant was even assigned to play with him. The lad took Han Jing along to throw dice and watch cricket fights, keeping him so entertained he soon abandoned himself to pleasure and picked up a gambling habit along the way. In less than 2 months, he'd forgotten all about returning to Chengdu. Feeling cooped up in the courtyard, he began venturing out of the manor with his personal servant, bringing the house down anywhere he went, drinking and carousing without a care in the world. But Shen Zichuan had allocated only so much money toward Han Jin's upkeep. Since he couldn't stop himself from gambling, he had to find the funds somewhere. And so, he had set his sights on Gao Zhongxiong. He showed up at Gao Zhongxiong's house almost every day, shouting, "Disloyal turncoat slave!" at the top of his lungs and cornering him to demand money as soon as he set foot outside. Gao Zhongxiong was helpless to deal with him and embarrassingly low on cash. How would he have the money to buy winter clothes? Within the inner chamber, Shen Zichuan's fingertips had gone numb in Xiao Chuye's grasp, though his mind was sharp as ever as he listened to the conversation. The wind had picked up after dark, sending snow-like puffs of cotton dancing through the sky. The wind chimes under the eaves clanked without cease. Fearing the din would disrupt the discussion within, Gu Jin, who had just returned from Beiyuan training grounds, called for someone to take them down. As he swept snow from his hair, he saw Fei Sheng approaching from the other end of the walkway. "Looking for Arya?" Hands occupied with the tray holding Shen Zichuan's medicine, Fei Sheng jerked his chin toward the room. "He's resting. Master won't allow us to call for him. The journey's been tough on all of you." "It's snowing so hard. Riding in this weather will be the death of me." Gu Jin had only just dismounted, and his ears were so numb from the wind he could feel nothing in them. "Arya hasn't had a decent night's sleep for the past fortnight." Fei Sheng sighed. Gu Jin stepped aside. "Go on ahead. Don't hold the governor up from taking his medicine." Fei Sheng strode forward, then turned back and said in a hushed tone, "They're going to be busy inside for quite a while. There's no need for anyone to stand guard here. When Chunyang and Xiao Tianyao return later, go to the duty room with them and rest. I'll have some snacks and hot tea sent over so you can have something in your stomachs later." No one knew when Xiao Chuye would wake up, but when he did, he would no doubt want to see them immediately. They'd been on the move for days now, and standing in the bitter wind was nigh unbearable. This was indeed a thoughtful offer. The duty room was just a stone's throw from the courtyard, and they could dart out in the blink of an eye if they were called. Gu Jin cupped his fists in thanks for Fei Sheng's kindness and held up the hanging screen for him to enter. Shen Zichuan had given no order to light the lamps, so Fei Sheng didn't offer. He entered with the tray in hand and ladled the medicine into a porcelain bowl. Yao and Yu and the rest were still speaking in the outer room at a volume only Shen Zichuan could hear. Shen Zichuan took the spoon in his free hand and sipped slowly. Fei Sheng had stepped as quietly as possible, but Xiao Chuye still woke up. Brow furrowed, Xiao Chuye took a moment to orient himself before sitting up in one swift move. His black shadow abruptly enveloped Shen Zichuan, giving Fei Sheng a fright. Blinking away his heavy sleep, Xiao Chuye turned to Shen Zichuan and rasped, "What time is it?" Shen Zichuan set down his spoon and looked at Fei Sheng. "Arya, it's a few hours since the sunset," Fei Sheng answered. To Xiao Chuye's surprise, he had slept almost 6 hours, and he was still holding Shen Zichuan's hand. He rubbed his neck with his free hand. "Is Gu Jin back?" Fei Sheng collected the bowl and spoon. "Only this moment. They're all in the duty room now. I'll get someone to summon them if Arya wishes." "Go," Xiao Chuye said, rising. "Tell them to meet me in the side hall. I'll be there shortly." Hearing voices in the inner chamber, the group outside fell quiet. Fei Sheng stepped out with the empty bowl, glanced meaningfully at the gentleman in the outer chamber, and ducked under the hanging screen to call for someone to summon Chun Yang and the others. Shen Zichuan flexed his numb fingers, gone red in Xiao Chuye's grip. As Xiao Chuye pulled on his outer robe, he asked, "Have you been sitting here all this time?" The bitterness of the medicine still pervaded Shen Zichuan's mouth. Thoughts occupied with the situation in Fanzhou, he replied, somewhat distracted, "That's right. My back hurts." Xiao Chuye poured himself a cup of cooled tea and held it to his mouth as he quickly dressed. When he saw Shen Zichuan get to his feet, he stood in his path, refusing to let him leave. Shen Zichuan raised his eyebrows in question, and Xiao Chuye took hold of his chin. Shen Zichuan wasn't tall enough to reach Xiao Chuye's lips to begin with, and Xiao Chuye didn't bend down when he held Shen Zichuan's chin. Shen Zichuan was forced to stand on tiptoe as Xiao Chuye kissed him, letting the tea flow onto Shen Zichuan's tongue and sweeping away the lingering bitterness. Xiao Chuye drew Shen Zichuan into his arms, and Shen Zichuan gripped Xiao Chuye's sleeves as he plundered Shen Zichuan's mouth until his knees went weak. Unable to hold the tea in his mouth, Shen Zichuan hastily swallowed, only to choke and burst into a fit of coughs. Those in the outer room had already drunk their fill of tea. Hearing the coughs, Zhou Gui worried Shen Zichuan had caught another cold. Before he could voice his concern, Kong Ling spoke up. "The stove burns too hot in this room. I'll wheel Yuanzhuo to the door for some air." Yao Wenyu arranged his cloak and agreed. "Yes, I'll have to trouble Mr. Cheng Feng." The two of them hustled Zhou Gui outside. After waiting under the eaves for less than the time it took an incense stick to burn, they saw Xiao Chuye step out. The group bowed. "Are ye?" Xiao Chuye's chin was slightly flushed from being knocked against. Seeing that Chun Yang and the rest had arrived, he returned their greeting. "I was worn out from the journey these past few days and kept you gentlemen from your official business. You have my sincere apologies." "Arye, you've been working day and night on the battlegrounds," Kong Ling said. "Naturally, you should rest." They bowed once more to Xiao Chuye, who sped away with his own men to the side hall without further ado. Zhou Gui shivered under the eaves. He swept a glance at his companions and asked in bafflement, "Shall we go in?" Yao Wenyu sighed softly, but he couldn't hold back a smile as he gestured toward the hanging screen. "Let's go. You first, Your Excellency." While the leaders of Cizhou debated through the night, Fanzhou had already received the declaration of war. This was far from the first time King Yi had received such a denunciation from Cizhou, but their mutual sniping last year had come to naught. Shen Zichuan had shown no intention of mobilizing troops to fight him. He took the proclamation this time for a similarly empty threat and thought nothing of it. Fanzhou's government had expanded anew. King Yi had gathered all the gold, silver, and other treasures he'd plundered from Fanzhou and Dengzhou into a heap and called it the state treasury. He claimed to be saving these valuables to purchase grain and farmland in the spring, but in reality, he had appropriated them for himself in order to fund his lavish lifestyle. The number of common folks from the two prefectures who had either starved or frozen to death in the heavy snow this year was incalculable. Just a few days ago, several more houses had collapsed and sent even more people to their graves. King Yi turned a deaf ear to the reports from his subordinates and continued to indulge in debauchery. Many who stood by King Yi's side during his initial revolt had been slaughtered in the subsequent fight for arable land, and the majority who remained were bandits from the southern prefectures. When King Yi had crowned himself, he had promised the scholars of both prefectures that he would bring great change and restore the livelihoods of the people. But as soon as he settled himself atop his self-proclaimed throne, he took up his blade and cut down any scholars who remonstrated with him. Many commoners of the two prefectures, finding themselves even worse off than before, attempted to flee through the snowstorm. Those captured were executed on the spot by soldiers under King Yi's command. Any unlucky enough to be dragged back alive were branded with a mark on their chest and thrown into Fanzhou's prison as prey for King Yi's winter hunts. It was well after midnight. The pot-bellied King Yi reclined on satin cushions, drinking himself drunk to the music of reed pipes. He lifted his golden cup high. "Fill it up!" Two scantily clad women on either side of him stepped forward to pour his wine. Leaning back on his elbows, King Yi muttered, "Keep pouring, keep pouring." The ruby-red wine spilled over the rim of the cup and trickled down the woman's white jade arm, wetting the collar that gaped around her bosom. She snuggled into King Yi's embrace as he roared with laughter. He had long lost any sense of propriety. He reached for her into her bodice, fondling her in front of everyone. Cui Qing sat at the left of King Yi. A fresh-faced young man with dashing good looks knelt before her, holding her long-stemmed pipe. She took a drag, her eyes darting down below the youth's waist. "I escaped Duanzhou by the skin of my teeth. How will your highness reward me? I think this one will do just fine. With some proper coaching for me, he'll be incredible." This young man was handsome, with an unpowdered face, broad shoulders, and a trim waist. He raised his head to glance at her, the expression in his eyes sultry and frank. A tingle coursed through Cui Qing's body, and her heart itched. King Yi, large as he was, gestured for the woman serving him to help him turn his head. He looked down at the young man and sneered. "You certainly have a good eye. Do you know who this is?" Cui Qing lifted a foot and set it on the man's chest, feeling solid muscle beneath her soul. "I've never seen his like. Sweet thing, would you like to come home with me?" King Yi laughed boisterously, then dropped his voice to a malicious hiss. "His name is Hua Lingyuan, the eldest lawful son of Hua Qing. Know him? He was the commander of Dengzhou garrison troops before the dogs got him. I was trying to take over Dengzhou, and Hua Qing preferred to die rather than yield. He killed my younger brother in that battle. After I captured him, I had him tortured for 7 days and nights before dumping him in the hunting grounds so the Mastiffs could tear him to pieces." Cui Qing uttered a surprised, "Oh my," and moved in to scrutinize Hua Lingyuan's handsome face. With a cackle, she said, "Then your majesty is truly What? What are they saying?" I'm so sorry. Oh, gosh. "Then your majesty is truly magnanimous to have kept him by your side and raised him into such a pretty thing." "I initially wanted to kill him," King Yi said contemptuously. "He looks like a gentleman, but he's as timid as a mouse. When he saw his old man eaten by dogs, he threw himself down to hug my thighs and begged me to spare his life. To save himself, he was willing to submit to me like an animal. So I kept him as a dog by my side." Cui Qing ran her hands over Hua Lingyuan's chest, and Hua Lingyuan responded with an ingratiating smile. She gave him a tender push and said, "Good puppy. Show Mama how obedient you are." Woman. King Yi tossed his golden cup aside. "There's nothing he won't do, and he holds up pretty well. I gave him to Chi Feng to play with for 7 or 8 days, and he was still alive when he returned." Cui Qing's expression frosted over. "That Feng the 10th is still so despicable in his old age," she snapped. "He can hardly control his bowels these days, yet he'd vie with me over a man. Look at me, darling. I'm much nicer than that old geezer. It must have been hard on you serving a wrinkled old macaque like him." Hua Lingyuan's chest heaved. His clothes hung loosely off him, secured only around his waist. He was all docile obedience as Cui Qing pressed in. The interior of the hall was a wanton scene, made more obscene by the reedy moan Cui Qing let slip as Hua Lingyuan returned her fondling. She fell back into the cushion and motioned for him to continue. King Yi, having already overindulged in carnal pleasures, applied himself to his wine. He loved wine as he did his life, and he drank himself bloated amid his bawdy court. As he rested upon the tender, fragrant bodies of the women around him, who dutifully massaged his shoulders and kneaded his legs, his snores rumbled like thunder. The snow outside fell for half the night. By the time the sky began to pale with dawn, King Yi and his guests were sleeping like the dead. Okay, keep reading. Arms spread across his silk cushions, King Yi exhaled stale breath that reeked of wine. Nearby, Huo Ling Yuan wiped dried sweat off his body. He looked at King Yi, only a short distance away, then, moving soundlessly amid the deafening snores, stepped over the others to squat down beside his head. King Yi didn't like his guards too close when he was making merry. He feared death, so the guards with their blades were ordered to stand outside the door. Huo Ling Yuan had served as a plaything under King Yi's command for half a year, suffering unimaginable humiliation, all for an opportunity like this. He looked at King Yi as if he was the dogs that had torn his father apart. 3 soft knocks sounded on the door. Huo Ling Yuan knew then that they'd succeeded. But he didn't stand. Instead, he patted King Yi's cheek and picked up a cushion. King Yi's snores stuttered as he stirred in his sleep. His splayed hand knocked aside the empty golden cup. It clattered noisily to the floor, and he finally opened his eyes. On seeing Huo Ling Yuan, he broke out in a cold sweat. "Away with you!" Huo Ling Yuan burst into action. He ruthlessly planted the cushion over King Yi's face. King Yi struggled violently, the flailing of his thick limbs startling some of the others in the hall awake. Huo Ling Yuan trapped all the pasty, rippling flesh under the cushion. King Yi gasped for breath that would not come. Cui Qing woke groggily, looking around without comprehension. Huffing for breath, the terrified King Yi's muffled shouts came through the cushion. Men! Men! Save me! Huo Ling Yuan began to laugh. He released his grip on the struggling King Yi, abandoning his attempt to smother him. King Yi scrambled out from under Huo Ling Yuan's hands and promptly sank into the pillows around him, unable to move under his own weight. He shouted himself hoarse. "Men, come quick!" Huo Ling Yuan felt for an object hidden in the folds of material around his waist and stalked after King Yi. Naked, King Yi writhed on the ground like a maggot, shouting for his guards. Gradually, he realized, such silence meant the guards at the door were already dead. He heaved his heavy body forward, weeping in terror, and prostrated himself at Huo Ling Yuan's feet. Ling Yuan! He pulled over the first woman he could reach and shoved her toward Huo Ling Yuan. "Let me live. I'll give you Fanzhou. Everything I have is yours. You can have the title of King Yi too." Chest heaving, Huo Ling Yuan yanked King Yi up by the hair. King Yi was still reeling from this sudden reversal. Before he had fallen asleep, everyone in Fanzhou was still at his command. He kicked his knees and squealed like a stuck pig. It finally struck Cui Qing what was happening. She fumbled desperately for her clothing as Huo Ling Yuan dragged King Yi closer to her, frantically shaking her head. "It has nothing to do with me. Nothing to do..." A thunderous blast exploded in her ears, leaving them ringing. Her eyes were wide as she froze in place, stupefied and voiceless, her face splattered with red and white gore. The area between Huo Ling Yuan's thumb and index finger burned from the recoil of the bronze musket. The sensation thrilled him. King Yi's head looked like a watermelon trampled to pulp. A deathly silence descended over the hall, broken a moment later by Cui Qing's sharp scream. She scrambled forward on all fours like a madwoman. Then, clutching her clothes, she ran barefoot across the hall and lunged at the doors. But when the door swung open, Cui Qing scrabbled backward and fell, her eyes trained on the doorway crammed with rifles. "You abducted women for him." Huo Ling Yuan stood in the shadows, scraping splattered bits of King Yi's head off his cheek and tasting them before spitting them back out. "Okay, whatever floats your boat, I guess." He stared at Cui Qing, his voice frigid. "You reared those Mastiffs for him." Cui Qing shook her head. covering her body as she crawled across the floor. She heard the sound of barking and saw the teeth of those very mastiffs as they tried to squeeze through the legs of the men at the door. Huo Lingyuan stepped on King Yi's corpse and ran his gaze over the guests in the hall as though sizing up meat on the chopping block. All of you ought to get a taste of what they can do. Cui Qing's eyes bulged. She tried to push to her feet to run, but she'd gone weak in the knees. She watched helplessly as the dogs broke free of their chains and pounced, her own screams echoing in her ears. Amid the cacophony of the mastiffs feeding, Huo Lingyuan draped his wide-sleeved robe over his shoulders. He picked up the declaration of war King Yi had flung away and crushed it in his hand. Dang it, man. I want to keep reading. Gosh, okay. Well, that's all I can say. I enjoyed that last chapter. I'm glad I decided to tack it on here. I think that was a good place to end. So let's go over some of my notes, starting with chapter 193, Wary. Yan Huzhu. We have this guy who is thinking of offering playthings to Lanzhou. Bad idea, my guy. Not only will Lanzhou cut your head off, Xiao Zhiye will have it sewn back on. He'll probably sew it back on himself. I bet he can sew. Or he'll have someone do it, and then he'll cut your head off again. But he'll use a very dull blade so that you can feel it for a while. Anyway, So Yan Huzhu, he wants to give the port of Yongyi over to Chudu and give himself more control of his own business by making a new port in Liuzhou. And, Shen Zichuan thinks for now, right, like this is a good idea as well. But at the same time, even Qiao Chanya can see like this man, we don't want him around for too long. Anyway, this new port will help them get past Jiang Qing Shan, who still very much works for Chudu, essentially. And I have a note, hold on page 93. Yes, when Qiao Tanya was like, some people need killing, and Shen Zichuan was like, he's resourceful, he knows how to get on people's good sides. In time, he'll be more trouble than he's worth. So I'm just waiting for the day that time comes when it's like, ting, cut him off. So anyway, we move forward and Xiaowar is still looking for this Yideng who could help Lanzhou heal, even if not completely, at least some. But Yan Huzhu seems to like the idea of keeping Shen Zichuan sick. So what is he going to do? That's my question. So then, of course, when we move on to chapter 194, Sound Sleep, we have Xiao Zhiye is extremely thirsty. Xiao Zhiye is also extremely worn out. He's been going and going and going, and it doesn't help that he's cold. There is nothing worse than being tired and cold. You just can't sleep. It's so awful. At least I can't. Whenever I'm freezing, it's impossible for me to fall asleep. So anyway, not that he would fall asleep while traveling, but I'm just mentioning that. So yeah, he's exhausted. But we also learned that Xiao Jiming has done something new. He has his generals swapping areas, basically command, irregularly. And this is good because Hassan does not know anymore who he's facing. This victory that he thought he had secured, it didn't go the way he planned. He thought he had knocked them down, not even a peg, but completely. He thought he knocked the Libe armored cavalry down and they would just lose all hope and morale and everything. But he was very much mistaken, as Xiao Jiming had said. Just because they did lose some morale, like obviously, did not mean that they would fall completely. And so I'm loving this tactic that Jiming has incorporated. And it's really it's frustrating for the guys, but they see the benefit in this. They're growing. And I'm just very excited. There's some versatility that is happening. So then also we learn basically, yes, goal, Shen Zichuan, ruler of Zhongbo, period. I support, hands down. And then, of course, we get a little bit on Han Jin. Han Jin was, of course, released some chapters ago, and it's 2 months ago. And after his release, because of all the torture and stuff he basically faced while he was in prison, And the unnice, that's not a word, the less than nice circumstances he faced, this guy is just happy to be released and wasting his life away, gambling, getting drunk, and all those things, and then even going to Gao Zhongxiong and begging for money so that he can continue gambling and drinking his life away. At some point, we'll see, I guess, what happens with him, just as far as, like, I'm thinking from the perspective of Gao Zhongxiong and what's going to happen from that. Y'all, I be trying. I really do be trying not to just throw everybody in the well. I was trying not to throw King Yi in the well. When we first read some stuff, I was like, okay, he's scum. I don't like him, And then reading these chapters, I was like, okay, he's still scum. I don't like him. But then to hear that he made promises to lots of scholars, but then as soon as he rose up on his throne, he betrayed them and was, exterminating them, as I'm going to say, if they disagreed with him. And then he was also not even allowing common folk to leave if they wanted to escape the situation they were in, but they were being killed or captured and then used for live hunting. Not only that, but any association with Sui Qing, you're just like automatically, it's a no. It's a no for me, because you got this woman who is trafficking children for you, and you're doing, and these women that you're indulging in, and to the well. I could no longer not put him in the well. It was just undeniable. And then I think I had already said Sui Qing goes to the well as well. But yeah, she definitely goes to the well, in case that was not clear. And I'm just so glad that Huo Lingyuan got his revenge. I'm glad that he used the gun. And y'all should see the image of him standing, like his foot on the man's body, which I ain't gonna lie, this man looks very, very unattractive. Like, not his face. Obviously, we can't see that because it's been blasted by the gun. But like his body, it looks awful. It looks so awful. Oh my gosh. And Huo Lingyuan actually looks kind of nice. But anyway, I'm glad he got his revenge, because I'm sorry, you killed this man's father in front of him by having a bunch of ravenous dogs rip his body apart. And you think that he submitted to you because he cared about his life so much and just didn't want to die? No, sir. He was biding his time for revenge for the way that you killed his father. He wanted to make sure that you got your just desserts. And your just desserts was a bullet to the face and watermelon squashed, whatever it says, watermelon pulp. I was not okay with him like tasting the blood or whatever, but that's okay. I mean, we all do things when we get to certain points in life, Anyway, I loved that. So now that the declaration of war, he's crumbled it up in his hands and King Yi is dead, I'm wondering what exactly is going to happen now concerning Fanzhou, because the King Yi is gone. So is there a need to declare war anymore? Like, what are we doing? Anyway, that was it for today. I went ahead and read one extra chapter because I was feeling it. So anyway, we will not be having a chapter tomorrow, but this Saturday on the 28th, we're having our live reading. We're going to read only 3 chapters. So that's going to be chapters 196, 197, and 198. Yeah. I hope you all enjoyed this. Please let me know your thoughts and reactions in the comment section. And well, I